The scream came at 1:13 a.m. on a muggy July night, 1996, in the wooded outskirts of Denton Hollow, Pennsylvania, a forgotten mining town where secrets clung to the hills like moss. It wasn't just one scream. It rose, panicked female sharp, and then was cut off mid-breath. What followed was a silence so absolute it rang louder than the sound itself. 3 neighbours reported it. An old widower named Eugene Brooks, who kept a police scanner and a loaded shotgun by his bed. A night nurse named Valerie Reyes driving home with her windows down. And 12-year-old Michael Bell, who heard it through the walls of his room and told his mother it made his bones cold. But by the time Sheriff Conrad Dixon reached the area, a dead-end gravel road with 5 houses and 1 rotting mobile home, the woods had swallowed every trace. There was no victim, no blood, no broken branches, no open doors, just the humid hush of summer insects and a sense, as Deputy Riley described it, like the forest was watching us back. The scream had come from somewhere behind the last house on Oak Knife Trail. That house belonged to the Morgan family. Daryl Morgan was a Vietnam vet, a quiet man who drank more than he spoke. His wife Lillian was rarely seen outside church and never without a cigarette trembling in one hand. Their only daughter Rachel was 17 and beautiful in a way that made teachers stammer and neighbours whisper. When questioned that night, Daryl answered the door shirtless, his knuckles raw. "No scream came from here," he said. Lillian appeared behind him, bruised along the cheekbone, arms crossed. "It was probably a fox. They scream like women. Happens all the time out here." Rachel wasn't home. She hadn't come home from her shift at the diner. Her uniform was still in the laundry room. Her room was untouched. Her bed was cold. "She's at a friend's," Daryl insisted. "We'll call around," Lillian added. They never did. That night was the last time anyone heard Rachel Morgan's voice. In the weeks that followed, a formal search was conducted. Volunteers combed the woods, dragging sticks and calling her name. Dogs were brought in from Pittsburgh. A pond behind the Morgans' property was dredged, coming up with nothing but a rusted tricycle and some old beer cans. No suspects, no evidence, no body. The case went cold so fast it burned. Rumours swirled like cigarette smoke through the diners and dollar stores of Denton Hollow. Some said she ran away. Others swore she'd been pregnant and dealt with. But it was Michael Bell, now 13 and shaken quiet, who said something that stuck. "I didn't hear one scream," he told a school counsellor. "I heard 2. The second was smaller, like a whisper scream, like someone was trying not to be heard. His mother refused to let him testify. She pulled him from school, and they moved away that spring. By 1998, the Morgans were gone. The house was boarded up. Locals avoided it, even kids looking for a dare. The case files gathered dust in the basement of the county sheriff's department. A single Polaroid of Rachel in her waitress uniform, blue dress, blank smile, sat pinned to a corkboard under a sign that read, "Silent Voices." And then time passed. The scream became a story. The story became a warning, and Rachel Morgan's name was spoken less each year until it wasn't spoken at all, until 2025. On the last day of March, a real estate developer named Marcus Boyd purchased 5 acres on the north end of Oak Knife Trail, including the old Morgan house. He wanted to bulldoze it and build luxury cabins for city folks who liked the idea of wilderness without the danger of actual wild. He didn't know about the scream. He didn't know about the girl. What he knew was that on April 2nd, during the second day of site clearing, one of his workers called him over in a panic. They'd been pulling up the stone-lined well at the back of the Morgan property, hidden under vines and half buried in soil. Inside the well was a bone. Not a stick, not a deer, a human femur, still wrapped in the tatters of what appeared to be a waitress uniform. The femur was old, dried, cracked like driftwood, but unmistakably human. It had been caught in a tangle of rotted cloth blue with a white collar and 4 faded buttons that matched the uniform once worn at Ruby's diner on Route 14. Rachel Morgan's last known workplace. The backhoe operator, a kid named Tanner Marks, vomited in the grass beside the well. He said he'd felt a chill come up through the controls when the bucket hit something solid. Sheriff Gwen Tolbert was the first on scene, a former homicide detective from Pittsburgh who'd moved to Denton Hollow 2 years earlier for a quieter life. She taped off the site and called in the forensic team from Harrisburg. By nightfall, the well was a crime scene, and by morning it was a grave. Inside the stone shaft, they found more bones, 2 arm bones, a partial spine, and fragments of skull. A faded leather shoe, a pearl earring tarnished black with time, and tucked into the rib cage, as if placed there with intention, was a rusted locket. Inside the locket was a photograph, creased water-damaged but visible under forensic light. It showed Rachel Morgan grinning at a carnival booth. Beside her, with an arm around her waist, was a face the sheriff didn't immediately recognise. But someone did. Denton Hollow hadn't forgotten Rachel, not everyone at least. Old Eugene Brooks, now nearly 80 and wheeled into the sheriff's office by his granddaughter, pointed at the photo and said 3 words. "That's Tommy Delridge." Tommy Delridge, Rachel's ex-boyfriend, 3 years older, college dropout, known for his temper, his Camaro and his black leather jacket with the white skulls stitched on the back. He'd left town in '97 after a bar fight ended with a broken jaw someone else's and hadn't been seen since. No address, no phone number, just gone. But the discovery of the locket changed everything. Sheriff Talbot reopened the case as a homicide. The town woke up. News vans returned. Reporters crowded the road. The Ghost of Oakknife Trail made regional headlines. And with that spotlight came stories. People who hadn't spoken in years stepped forward. One waitress at Ruby's remembered Rachel crying in the bathroom 2 nights before she vanished. She said she was being followed, the woman said. But she wouldn't say by who. Another man, now a manager at the lumberyard, admitted something else. "I saw Daryl Morgan the day after Rachel disappeared. He had dirt under his fingernails, deep, like he'd been digging. But none of it was evidence, until they tore down the Morgan house. It was Talbot's idea to preserve the site during demolition. She had forensic archaeologists document every square inch before anything was touched. And behind the wall in Rachel's bedroom, beneath the peeling wallpaper of blue roses, they found writing. Carved into the drywall with something sharp. A hairpin, maybe, or a nail. 6 words. I never left the house alive. It was Rachel's room, Rachel's wall, Rachel's hand. The timeline was changing. She hadn't been dragged into the woods. She'd died here or near here, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would know. And that's when Sheriff Talbot noticed something else. All the floorboards beneath Rachel's bed had been replaced. Not the rest of the room, only there. The new wood was darker, newer, the nails were different. They pulled up the boards, and underneath, hidden for nearly 30 years, was a second locket. This one had a name engraved on the back. To Rachel, always, TD, inside a picture of Tommy Delridge, and a note folded so many times it crumbled at the edges. "If he finds this before I get out, I'm already dead." The note was brief, no more than a dozen words, but its meaning landed like a punch in the chest. "If he finds this before I get out, I'm already dead." Sheriff Talbot held it between gloved fingers as the forensic team gently extracted the locket and surrounding materials. The ink had faded, but it was unmistakably handwritten. The slant and shape matched Rachel's diary entries preserved in the original case files from 1996. But there was a problem. According to those same files, Rachel never owned a second locket. And no one, neither her parents, her friends, nor her boyfriend at the time, had ever mentioned this message. Because no one ever knew it was there. It had been sealed beneath those floorboards for nearly 3 decades, like a buried confession from the dead. But the he in Rachel's note, who was he? Tommy Delridge or Daryl Morgan? Sheriff Talbot stared down at the rotting subfloor, feeling the house around her settle like a dying breath. One man had vanished. The other had already taken a grave with him. Daryl Morgan had died in 2014. Heart failure in a VA hospital. No last words, no will, no closure. Lillian Morgan, however, was still alive. She lived in a subsidised apartment 2 towns over. Her name was still listed under a phone line, although she hadn't answered a call in years. When Talbot knocked on her door, it took 5 full minutes for the lock to rattle. Lillian appeared in a thick sweater despite the April heat. Her hair was thinner, dyed badly, and her voice had the dried, papery sound of someone who'd spent too long in silence. "I knew someone would come," she said, and let them in without another word. The apartment was dim, newspapers stacked against the wall, an ashtray overflowing on the coffee table. Talbot showed her the locket, the one from under the floorboards. Lillian stared at it, then turned away. "I begged him to stop," she said. "I told him she was just a girl." Talbot's pulse quickened. "You're saying Daryl killed her?" Lillian didn't answer directly. Instead, she moved slowly to a hallway cabinet, reached inside, and returned with a small box. Inside was a photograph of Rachel Young, radiant, smiling, and under it a folded piece of paper browning at the edges. It was a printed flyer, a missing persons bulletin from 1996, but on the back, written in pencil, was a single line. Tommy wasn't the one, it was her father. The handwriting matched Rachel's. Lillian trembled as she lit a cigarette. She tried to run away that night, she said, voice shaking. She screamed. I heard her, but Daryl got to her before I could. He said she was going to ruin us, that she had no loyalty. Talbot swallowed hard. Was she pregnant? Lillian nodded once. I didn't know who the father was. I didn't want to know. Back at the station, the revelations hit like thunder. For nearly 3 decades, Rachel had been thought missing, maybe abducted by a jealous boyfriend, maybe disappeared into the woods. Now it appeared she died in her own home by the hands of her own father and her body hidden just feet from where she slept. And yet, one question remained unanswered. If Daryl Morgan killed Rachel, why was her locket found in the well with her bones? How did she get from under the floor to 40 yards into the woods buried beneath a collapsed well? The forensic team provided the answer the next morning. The bones found in the well had been moved post-mortem years after death. The degradation of soft tissue indicated decomposition had mostly occurred elsewhere. Likely indoors, likely beneath flooring. Someone had dug her up. Someone had moved her. Talbot reviewed the Morgans' property deed. The floor in Rachel's room had been replaced in 2006, 10 years after her disappearance. The permits listed one name, Thomas Delridge. He'd returned, quietly, discreetly, just long enough to volunteer repairs to the Morgan home, then disappeared again. She checked for aliases, tax filings, criminal records, and there it was, a police report from 2009 in northern Maine, disorderly conduct, fleeing the scene. The address matched a remote cabin under the name T.D. Hartwell, an alias. The cabin still stood, remote, off-grid, but connected by a single winding trail. Talbot stared at the printed map, and then she picked up the phone. "We may have a living witness," she said to her deputy, "and he's not just hiding, he's running from something." It took nearly a day to get a warrant, another half day to organise the team. Sheriff Talbot didn't want to go in unprepared, not with what they might find, not if what she suspected about Thomas Delridge was true. By sunrise they were in Maine, 3 unmarked cruisers, 1 unmarked SUV. The air was wet with the thawing spring and the smell of pine. The cabin was isolated, no mail service, no phone line, 1 cracked solar panel on the roof, a bent metal chimney leaking wood smoke. It looked empty, like a place that had been abandoned or kept intentionally forgettable. But the trail behind the cabin showed fresh footprints, recent ones. They surrounded the place, quiet, professional. At 7:41 a.m, Talbot knocked. There was a pause, then a voice low hoarse. "It's open." Inside, Thomas Delridge was sitting in a wooden chair, hands resting on his knees, a shotgun across his lap. Not aimed, not held, just present. He looked older than his years. Sunken eyes, grey-streaked beard, calloused hands that didn't shake even now. "I knew you'd come," he said. The interrogation room was small and dim. Delridge didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't even ask why he was being questioned. He just stared at the mirror and waited. Sheriff Talbot slid a folder across the table. Inside the photographs, the well, the bones, the lockets. He flinched when he saw Rachel's face. "Tell me why you were back in Denton Hollow in 2006, she said. Silence. She waited. No rush. The story was there, it just hadn't decided how it wanted to be told. Finally, Delridge exhaled. "I went to see if it was true." If what was true, he looked up at her eyes red, that he killed her. According to Delridge, he and Rachel had broken up weeks before she vanished. Her father had forced it, said Tommy wasn't good enough, and that he was getting too close. Rachel had called him the night she disappeared, whispering into the phone. She told me she was scared, that he found something in her drawer. Talbot asked what she meant. Delridge hesitated. A pregnancy test. He said he drove over that night, parked 2 houses down, but never made it to the door. A scream stopped him, then a second smaller one like a gasp before drowning. He panicked, drove off, left her, and for years that guilt rotted him from the inside. But in 2006, his uncle passed away and left him a small inheritance. With the money, he returned to Denton Hollow unannounced under the name Hartwell. He volunteered to repair the floors in the abandoned Morgan house, a favour to the bank, he claimed. But it wasn't about charity. "I needed to know," he said, "and when I pulled those boards up, I did." Talbot stared at him. "So you found her?" Delridge nodded, curled up, like she'd fallen asleep under there. "And you moved her?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "I couldn't leave her like that. Not in that place. I thought maybe if I buried her somewhere quiet, somewhere the light touch, she might rest." "You moved a murder victim and didn't report it," Talbot said. His voice cracked. "I thought I was reporting it, just to her, not the law." Delridge was detained, official charges pending, but he wasn't the killer, and they both knew it. He was the witness, the one who had been closest to the truth for nearly 30 years but had never spoken it aloud, until now. And still one thing gnawed at Talbot's mind. Rachel's body had been moved to the well, but that meant someone else could have moved it, could have staged it, could have left a different trail. She returned to the evidence list, reviewed every item catalogued from the well, and there buried in the bottom of the box was a small rusted object that hadn't been analysed properly yet, a pocket knife. Its wooden handle carved with initials, DM, Daryl Morgan, Rachel's father. And when forensics cracked the dried blood in the hinge, they found a partial DNA profile. Not Rachel's. Male, unidentified, but closely related to her. And beneath the blade, a single hair, fine, dark, and clinging to a fragment of skin. Daryl Morgan hadn't buried his daughter once. He'd gone back years later, and buried her again. The hair was the final whisper of truth, the kind that survives even 30 years of silence. Sheriff Talbot sat alone in the lab office, the printout spread before her like a puzzle half completed. Daryl Morgan's initials etched into the knife. DNA trace under the blade matching a familial male. The case thought to be buried with Rachel's bones was unearthing itself again. Daryl had returned after the murder. That much was clear now. But why? Why risk discovery by exhuming a body he'd gone to such lengths to hide? Why move her from under the floorboards and lower her into the well? It was more than guilt, it had to be. Talbot reopened the old 2006 property logs. Floor replacements, equipment rentals, the supplier who had delivered stonework to the Morgan house that same year. She found it. A company out of Scranton. One order dated April 14th, 2006. Item cement sealant, use well restoration. Daryl hadn't just buried her, he'd tried to seal her in. Meanwhile, back in Denton Hollow, the town was shifting. The news had exploded. The Oak Knife Remains headlines read. National networks picked it up. The photo of Rachel Bright smiling forever 17 was on television again. Michael Bell, now 41 and working in a shipping warehouse in Ohio, came forward. I heard the screams, he told reporters. I've heard them every night since. He returned to Denton Hollow for the first time in 29 years, and standing at the edge of the overgrown Morgan property, he said something strange to Talbot. There were 3 screams, he said softly, not 2. Talbot narrowed her eyes. You only told your school counsellor about 2. He nodded. I was scared. I thought no one would believe me. He looked past her toward the broken silhouette of the old well. The first was Rachel. The second, quieter, like she was trying to speak but couldn't. The third came minutes later. I was sure it was Lillian. That night, Talbot drove back to the assisted living apartment where Lillian Morgan stayed. She hadn't spoken publicly since her partial confession. Talbot brought the folder with her. Inside were 2 photos, one of the recovered knife, the other of the original evidence log from 1996, where Lillian claimed she heard nothing. I think you heard it all, Talbot said. Lillian didn't move, didn't blink. I think you heard Rachel scream. I think you saw Daryl carry her body through the woods. I think you knew she was buried twice and never said a word. Lillian's cigarette ash trembled on the edge of the tray. I tried to stop him, she said finally, but I couldn't. You carved her obituary into that wall Talbot pressed. You kept the flyer. You wrote that note. You knew. Lillian's eyes finally met hers. I was afraid of him. He said if I told anyone, he'd bury me beside her. Talbot leaned forward. But he didn't, Lillian. You're still here, and she's not. Lillian's hands began to shake. She reached for her purse. From it, she pulled a cassette tape. Unlabeled, dusty. He made me record over it, she whispered. But he didn't rewind far enough. There's still some of it left. What happened that night? The station didn't even have a cassette player. Talbot had to borrow one from a retired high school teacher. She placed the tape inside, hit play. Static, then a faint voice. You're not going to do this. Rachel's voice. Then another voicemail, drunken, low. I told you, no child of mine is going to ruin my life. A struggle, a crash, a scream. Then silence. Then breathing. Then soft sobbing Lillian's voice. She's not moving, Daryl. And we have to call someone. Please. Then the tape cut. Sheriff Talbot sat back, eyes closed. The case was solved. But justice, that would be harder. Daryl Morgan was dead. Rachel Morgan was buried. But Lillian had one more secret. One she hadn't revealed in 19 discs. One she hadn't told anyone. Until now, Rachel wasn't the only girl in that house, she said quietly. She had a sister. Sheriff Talbot felt the air in the room change, as if even the walls, dusty and yellowed with age, were holding their breath. A sister, she repeated. Lillian nodded slowly, like the word itself had grown too heavy to carry. Half-sister, she clarified. Before me, from someone else. Daryl wouldn't talk about her. Talbot stared, eyes narrowing. What was her name? Lillian flicked her cigarette ash. Dana. Dana Morgan. Born in 78. Sent to live with Daryl's sister in Delaware after her mother passed. Talbot scribbled furiously into her notebook. And why wasn't she in the original records? There's no mention of a Dana Morgan in the 1996 report. Rachel was listed as an only child. Lillian gave a hollow laugh. Daryl had that kind of control back then. He erased people when they became inconvenient. But why bring this up now? Lillian met her eyes, because Dana came back in 2006, just like Tommy. That stopped everything. Are you saying Dana was there at the house when the floor was replaced? Lillian's voice lowered to a whisper. She was the one who made him do it. Sheriff Talbot didn't sleep that night. She stayed at the station poring over public records school registry's census data. It was like chasing a ghost. There was a Dana Morgan born in 1978, but the trail ended in 1989 when she was officially adopted by her aunt and uncle. After that, the name disappeared, but something surfaced a driver's license under the name Dana Kessler issued in 2005 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Cross-referencing it with real estate records revealed that Dana Kessler had purchased a small property outside of Denton Hollow in late 2006. Just after the Morgan floorboards were replaced, Talbot stared at the screen. Dana had been here. She had come back. And like Tommy, she had disappeared again. The next day, Talbot and Deputy Riley drove out to the address. The house was empty, overgrown, long abandoned. But in the crawl space beneath the porch, they found a plastic storage bin wrapped in painter's tarp. Inside were water-damaged letters, a photo album, and one thing that made Talbot's stomach tighten. A hand-drawn map of the Morgan property, dated April 2006. X marks under the bedroom. Another X larger circled over the well. Scrawled next to the second X was a message. If he moved her, it means he was still watching. Talbot looked at Deputy Riley. She knew Rachel had been moved, and she knew when. Riley ran a hand through his hair, so she either helped, or she watched it happen. And if she watched, Talbot said, voice dark, she may know everything. They issued a nationwide search for Dana Kessler. 6 hours later, they got a hit. She'd been arrested in 2013 under the name Dana Vaughan Disorderly Conduct in New Jersey. She'd been picked up and released. No charges filed. No known address since then, until now. A flagged transaction came through. Dana Vaughan had used a prepaid debit card at a grocery store in Harrisburg just 30 miles from Denton Hollow. 3 days ago. The footage showed her older wiry wearing a ball cap and sunglasses, but unmistakable once they cross-checked the DMV photo from 2005. She was here, still hiding, still watching. The trap was simple. They traced her next purchase gasoline Route 22 and found her car through highway camera feeds, a red Honda plates partially obscured. By midnight they had her. She didn't resist. Just sat quietly in the interrogation room, hands folded like she'd been expecting it for years. Tell me what happened in 2006, Talbot said, placing the photos on the table. Dana didn't look down. Her eyes were hollow. You think this ends with Rachel, she said. But it started way before her. Talbot leaned in. So tell me, start at the beginning. Dana looked past her to the mirror, and then finally whispered, the well wasn't the only grave Darryl dug. The well wasn't the only grave Darryl dug. Dana's voice was steady, empty, like she'd rehearsed those words alone in the dark for years. Sheriff Talbot sat still, letting the silence stretch. Finally Dana leaned forward and whispered, I was 12 when he locked me in the crawl space. Talbot blinked. Dana didn't flinch. After my mother died, he came for me. Said it was time to be a Morgan again. Aunt Judy tried to stop him, but she didn't have legal custody, and he convinced her. A few weeks later, I was living in that house. Talbot felt her pulse in her ears. It was Rachel's house too, right? Dana gave a crooked smile. Rachel was 7. Sweet. Kind. She didn't understand what he was. Not yet. Dana spoke for hours in slow halting pieces. She told Talbot how Darryl Morgan had been a tyrant in silence. How he ruled the house with glances, fists, and long stretches of terrifying calm. He liked control, she said. Even over time, if dinner was 5 minutes late, there was a price. At 14, she ran away. She made it 6 miles before he found her, dragged her back through the woods, locked her in the crawl space beneath the porch for 2 days with no food. When she got out, she didn't run again. Not for 4 more years. At 18, she escaped for good. Moved states, changed her name, disappeared into the static of society. But then in 2006 she saw a newspaper. It wasn't about Rachel, it was about the house, an auction listing. The Morgan place foreclosed, abandoned up for grabs. Dana didn't want the house. She wanted closure, and she knew Rachel was still in it. What did you find when you came back? Talbot asked quietly. Dana stared at the table. I came alone. Tommy came later, we didn't talk much, but he knew. I think he knew before I said anything. They found Rachel's remains together. She was curled beneath the floorboards. She still had her diner badge. Talbot asked the question that had haunted her since the beginning. Whether well? Dana hesitated. Because that's where he said he'd bury me, if I ever told. A pause. And because I thought maybe that's where he buried someone else. Talbot's heart caught. Someone else. Dana nodded once. I remembered something. A fight. Screaming. I was maybe 9. I heard something late one night like someone being dragged. A girl's voice I didn't know. Dana had asked Rachel the next morning. Rachel said it was a dream, but her eyes had been red from crying. Talbot leaned forward. Are you saying Daryl killed another girl before Rachel? Dana's voice cracked. Yes, but I don't know her name. I just know she was older. Maybe someone he was seeing in secret. Someone who came to the house at night. She was gone the next day, and no one ever mentioned her again. Talbot whispered, and you think he buried her in the woods? No, Dana said, not the woods. She pulled something from her coat pocket. A key to the storm cellar. Talbot blinked. The Morgan house didn't have a cellar. Dana shook her head. That's what the records say. But it does. It's just hidden, behind the shed, covered in vines. Her hands trembled as she pushed the key forward. I never had the nerve to go down there. At first light, Talbot assembled a small team. They returned to Oak Knife Trail. The trees trembled in a soft breeze and dew glistened on the moss-covered ground like sweat on skin. Behind the crumbling shed, half buried in weeds and rust, was a trapdoor. Just as Dana had said. It took 3 crowbars and nearly an hour to pry it open. Stale air rose from the black hole beneath. A ladder descended into darkness. Sheriff Talbot went first. Her boots hit the dirt floor with a dull thud. A single hanging light bulb flickered when she pulled the chain, and there beneath years of dust and silence was a sealed concrete slab, fresh enough to not belong. Carved crudely into its surface were 4 words. No one will find her. No one will find her. The words etched into the concrete slab were rough, uneven, scratched in with either a nail or a pocket knife. The handwriting matched a sample pulled from Daryl Morgan's military documents. Sheriff Talbot stood frozen for a moment, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. Around her, the old storm cellar felt more like a crypt than a basement. Moisture dripped from the stone walls. The air had the sour, iron-heavy smell of earth long undisturbed. Deputy Riley radioed from above, voice strained. You good down there? Talbot didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the slab. Something about it felt rushed. No proper seal, no visible rebar, and worse, a hairline crack at the edge. Call in the ground-penetrating radar team, she said finally, and a forensic anthropologist. We're not leaving this covered another day. It was 3 hours later the team arrived. The radar confirmed it beneath the slab was a cavity, roughly the size of a small coffin. When they broke the concrete, the smell hit first. Damp rot and long-decayed flesh. Then the bones emerged, curled in a fetal position, tangled in remnants of fabric-lace shredded cotton, the rusted wire frame of a bra, and something else. A bracelet, beaded, blue and white, with a name spelled out in plastic letters, CRSSCIE. Talbot felt her breath hitch. She didn't recognize the name, neither did Dana when shown the photo. But one of the older detectives, Benson, a local, leaned in. There was a missing girl by that name, he said, voice quiet. Cassie Talbot. No relation. 19. Vanished in 1989 on her way through town, hitchhiking east. Sheriff Talbot closed her eyes. Rachel hadn't been the first. She had been the last. In the days that followed, everything moved fast. The remains were positively identified as Cassie Talbot through dental records. The case long buried in the unsolved file drawers of Pennsylvania's cold case archive was reopened. Sheriff Gwen Talbot had 2 murders on her hands, one old, one older. Both linked to Daryl Morgan, and both hidden by silence, buried by time and fear, and a town that had stopped asking questions. But even in death, Daryl had not acted alone, because someone had poured that concrete. Someone had etched those words. Someone had helped him hide the body. The evidence led back once again to Lillian Morgan. Confronted with the photographs of the cellar, the bracelet, the slab, she didn't deny it. I helped him seal it, she whispered. He said she was a mistake, that she came to the house drunk, that it wasn't what it looked like. Talbot didn't blink, but it wasn't it? Lillian gave a tiny nod. She said no, I heard her, and he didn't stop. Talbot's voice was cold, and you sealed her under concrete. Lillian's eyes welled. I was afraid. Afraid he'd do the same to me, to Rachel, to Dana. And he did, Talbot said. All 3. Lillian Morgan was arrested, charged as an accessory after the fact in both murders. Public reaction was divided. Some saw her as a victim of abuse caught in a lifetime of fear. Others called her a coward, a collaborator, a mother who failed to save her daughters, and someone else's daughter too. But for Sheriff Talbot, there was still one piece left. Tommy Delridge. They brought him back in, and when shown the bracelet, the cellar, and Dana's full confession, He broke down for the first time. "I should have stopped it," he said. "I should have told someone. I should have gone back sooner." He wasn't guilty of the murder, but he had helped hide Rachel's body, moved her, tried to give her peace in the only way he knew how. Talbot looked him in the eye. "You don't get to disappear again, you'll testify." He nodded. "I owe her that." By summer, the Morgan property was officially seized by the state. The woods were cordoned off, the well sealed permanently, the cellar filled in. Rachel Morgan and Cassie Talbot were laid to rest this time in marked graves. Sheriff Talbot stood beside the headstones as dusk fell. 2 names, 2 dates, 2 stories that had waited nearly 3 decades to be told. And in her pocket she held something found deep in the Morgan attic, folded carefully between pages of an old hymnal. Rachel's final diary entry: "If anyone ever finds this, please don't let him win. Tell the truth, all of it." The town of Denton Hollow no longer whispered Rachel Morgan's name. It spoke it. In diner booths on dusty front porches outside the church on Sundays, people remembered the girl they had once tried to forget. The girl with the soft voice and bruises she never explained. The girl whose face was plastered on telephone poles, but whose truth lay buried under floorboards and stone. Sheriff Talbot had uncovered the rot, but she had also disturbed something else: complicity. Teachers who hadn't asked enough. Neighbours who heard screams but shut their windows. Friends who told themselves that's just how things are in that family. Now they couldn't hide behind silence. A memorial was organised for both Rachel and Cassie Talbot, held on the hill behind the rebuilt school gymnasium. Dana stood in the back, a dark scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, fingers twitching with nerves. She hadn't planned to speak, but when the microphone passed her way, she stepped forward. "I was Rachel's sister," she said. "Not by blood, not by law, but by what we survived." The air held still. She used to sing when she was scared. Quiet, barely audible, like a breath. But it helped. I remember just once she looked at me and said, "Maybe if I sing loud enough someone will hear me." Dana looked toward the woods. Somebody finally did. That summer, Talbot submitted her final report to the state. Victims: Rachel Morgan, age 17, Cassie Talbot, age 19. Primary perpetrator deceased Daryl Morgan. Accessories: Lillian Morgan charged Thomas Delridge immunity in exchange for testimony. Dana Kessler, no charges recommended. In the margins of her file she penciled 3 words. She was right. Because Rachel had tried to be found even in death. Through etchings in drywall, through the hidden locket, through a buried diary and a note meant for anyone who might care to look. And now, nearly 3 decades later, justice had arrived. Imperfect, late, but real. Tommy Delridge left town quietly after the trial. No interviews, no headlines. Just a single bouquet of lilies placed without a word on Rachel's grave each June 19th. Dana remained. She got a job at the library where she sorted books and repaired bindings and sometimes helped young girls write poetry. She never told them her story, but sometimes when they asked about the scar on her hand, she just said, "It's from a storm I survived," and they understood. As for Sheriff Talbot, she stayed on. The case had changed her, weathered her, but not broken her. On slow days, she'd drive past Oak Knife Trail, now renamed Rachel's Way, and park near the memorial bench beneath the oaks. She'd sit in silence, listen to the wind in the trees, and sometimes, if she let her thoughts drift just enough, she could almost hear it, that soft voice, singing, not in fear anymore, but in peace. The trial was over, the dust had settled, but in Denton Hollow the echoes remained. Lillian Morgan was sentenced to 12 years for obstruction of justice and accessory, after the fact in the concealment of 2 murders. She would serve time in a women's facility north of Pittsburgh, her name now spoken with a mixture of disdain and pity, a woman too afraid to save her daughter, too broken to speak the truth when it mattered most. Her final interview before sentencing was brief. She asked me to help Lillian and said voice flat, and I didn't. The judge called her silence a second crime. Cassie Talbot's parents came to claim her remains. They were older now, bent by time grief having settled into their bones, but they buried her with the bracelet she wore the night she vanished. They left a note on Sheriff Talbot's desk before leaving town. "Thank you for not letting her be forgotten. She's home now." Dana stayed through the summer. She helped coordinate a fund for girls fleeing domestic abuse. She organised Rachel's belongings, what little remained, and donated the diary, the lockets and the uniform pin to a small museum exhibit downtown. Her face was never shown in the local papers. She requested no recognition. When asked why she remained, her answer was simple. Rachel never got to leave this place. Someone should stay and carry her memory forward, and so she did. Tommy Delridge sent a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, addressed only to the people of Denton Hollow. It was read aloud at the unveiling of Rachel's memorial plaque. I failed her. I thought running would erase what I knew. But silence only feeds the dark. I'm sorry it took me so long to say her name again. Rachel was brave. Rachel mattered. Please don't let the world forget her like I did. There were tears in the crowd that day, but also a kind of healing. Sheriff Gwen Talbot retired the following year. Her final act in office was to establish a dedicated cold case unit in the county, something the area had never funded before. Because too many voices are buried, she said at the ceremony, and it's our job to keep listening. She passed the badge to her deputy with quiet pride, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The case had begun with a scream, a sound that tore through the quiet woods and vanished without trace. But it ended with something else, a name restored, a truth uncovered, and silence this time filled with peace, not fear. If you listened all the way through Rachel's story, thank you. Thank you for hearing the voice that was once nearly lost in the noise of indifference. Thank you for caring. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs reminding every voice matters. Every life leaves a mark, and sometimes even after 30 years of silence, justice finds a way. Subscribe for more haunting true stories. We tell them so they aren't forgotten. Not again, not ever.